Anger, plenty of anger, absolute rage for what was done here, but hope.
Remembering the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre and both the known and unknown victims from more than a century ago, May 31st into June 1st marks 105 years since the tragedy. Today, people gathered as part of the Tulsa Race Massacre Legacy Festival for a soil collecting ceremony. Fox 23's Ian Nickel was there today to show you that ceremony and the meaning behind it.
On Sunday morning, members of the Tulsa community gathered here at Standpipe Hill to commemorate the 105th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre and honor the lives who are unknown, recently identified, or well known to Greenwood. This year's ceremony honored the lives of C.L. Daniel, Victoria Ford Fletcher, and the unknown victims still waiting to be identified by putting soil from Greenwood into a jar with the victim's name on it to provide a proper burial for those who weren't given one. Dr. Tiffany Crutcher told us about the importance of this ceremony and how it's more than just symbolic.
I want to make sure that this day was more than symbolic, but that it was truly about memory and truly about the identity and the lives that were lost, that never received a proper memorial. We often talk about the destruction of buildings and property, but it's important to remember the lives who built Greenwood, especially during this time and this commemoration season.
Dr. Thomas Stanley, a professor at George Mason University in Virginia, is here in Tulsa for the first time. He told me his feelings about being on Black Wall Street during the anniversary of the massacre.
Not just anger, plenty of anger, absolute rage for what was done here, but hope. Because those people with their own ingenuity, their own belief in themselves, accomplished so much before it was taken from them. And if it was done once, it can be done again. If it was done once, it can be done again.
This ceremony was part of the two-day Legacy Fest that commemorated the 105th Tulsa Race Massacre and concluded Sunday evening with a candlelight vigil and worship service. In Tulsa, covering News That Matters, I'm Ian Nickel, Fox 23 News.
Good everything, Dr. Carr.
Good everything. Good everything, Dr. Huh?
Just Karen. Hi. Hi.
I feel the same way. Nobody called me Greg. I don't know why, but that's yeah. So
Yeah, well, at this point, calling you Greg just feels uncivilized. So, like, I don't
that's
call you.
Unfortunate because no, it's unfortunate. I reject the concept of civilization anyway. Like I think it was Einstein that said, asked about that.
Every time
it was Gandhi, I think. Well, go ahead. What you say? Every time every
time I sit with you, I have to rethink everything. We say things out of rote, out of just because we've always just said them, and we very rarely just think about why do I say this or why do I think this, and that should be the burning question in all of us. Like why don't I know this?
Ask the question that children ask.
Yeah.
Be as a child. Just ask. That was your friend. Heard you this week. Your show, the show on the channel, talking with our brother Chief Egonwale Amusan, who this time last week we were preparing to meet in the streets in Tulsa. Actually, by this time we were actually there. 7:30 Eastern is no. We were talking like we're talking now.
We were still talking in class with Carr at this time last week.
Yeah, we did a double-fisted dose. Respect to everyone who came out when we did it live. That was quite an undertaking. One that, I'm still thinking through that. There was so much going on. I saw so many people, friends, comrades, associates, the Tulsa airport. Sunday afternoon, I had no idea we're in Tulsa. They were 3 blocks down from us. We'll talk about that too. So at any rate, there's a lot going on.
Wait, there were people who look like us who were in Tulsa and had no idea?
Professor Karen Hunter. Professor Karen Hunter, we're going to talk about all of this before we
Okay.
get out of here
Okay.
today. But
And
the answer is yes. I'm talking about people who, put it this way, everybody was doing good work, but there were many strands. For me, in terms of that Africana Studies framework, there was a lot of social structure governance going on, and it's a beautiful thing. But yeah, a lot of that. It's beautiful, you know.
all right. And for those of you wondering, don't adjust your dial. Dr. Carr has some issues with his internet, so
Yeah, the internet
just
is
work.
out, so I had to go to
We'll
the
work through
data,
it.
so I just
Yeah,
moved.
yeah,
Yeah,
we'll work through it. We'll
absolutely.
work through it. I want to say this. I had not checked out, but this was the first time that I sat in everything's gonna be all right, because I'm a little bit of an OCD type personality who has to manage like I have to make sure all of the things are in its proper place. But something in my spirit said, just let it be. And so even right down, like I had booked my ticket a couple of months in advance, which was great because the price was very cheap before all of the gas prices and things started skyrocketing. The hotel, I had booked way in advance. And so I was like, I know I'm going to get there, and, barring, act of God. But what's going to happen, I had no idea. So let me just say that I got called last minute to host this thing, the event. I didn't even really know what the event was. Let me just be honest. So when DeMario said, can you host it? I was like, whatever it is, sure. I had no idea what I was saying sure to until I got the itinerary. I was like, oh, why did I say yes to this? Okay. All right. But I showed up, right? I didn't
As
realize
you always do.
I just show up. So I didn't realize how big the Legacy Fest was. I did not know the undertaking, Dr. Tiffany Crutcher, to pull that thing. That thing
Oh,
was amazing.
yes.
I didn't know that the tour was, I just thought it was going to be a tour. Dr. Carr, all right, there's a tour. We're going to walk the grounds where the people walked. Okay. Had no idea. When I think about the amount of things were done that week, and it feels like a whole week, and it just was last week. I know that there's a God, number one, but I also know that we are in something that can't be duplicated, can't be really examined under a microscope. It is driven by the Spirit, and I'm just grateful to be in the stream of it. Like I'm just getting in the stream of it and letting it take me. But I am so grateful. I'm so grateful because I could not have produced what happened last week on my own.
No, nobody could have. But you, like you said, click on an out. Well, you didn't say this, I'm saying it, but yes, that OCD, and we have a touch of it. But unlike you, I would never try to pull off what you pull off, because you brought all those people together, including me, got me and Larry there and all that. That was
That's true.
yeah.
I'm like, all right, when you gonna be there? What time? All right, you got to. All right, let's go. Look, Larry, you gonna be there
Yeah, you
anyway?
got.
Okay, good. Larry gonna be there anyway. Okay, here's what because I know it's like
Oh, I
where.
didn't. Oh, Larry was gonna
Yeah,
be there anyway.
she's on the board. Like this is what I'm talking about. The serendipity of that. Larry was gonna be there anyway because she's on the board of the legacy. That if you look at the
Oh, right, with
the
Jamario.
program,
Yes, of course, of
yeah,
course.
she's on the board, so she
Yeah,
was gonna be at the gala. Then Michael Harriet's
yeah.
there with his wife. I'm talking with him next
Mike and
week.
Karen were there.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, and I didn't realize till I opened the pamphlet, the program. I said, oh, okay, this is a thing. I'm hosting it.
And
Okay.
that still was something. It's very interesting. As we were there Saturday morning, walking the area between Greenwood and Archer, that corner, and then all the way down the block is Pine. So the whole gap is a literal gap. And just as we were on stage there with Sister Tiffany, with Dr. Crutcher, that conversation we had, then in that gap between the conversation and the concert that night when Fantasia came, just walking up and down, because they had a whole African street festival, just listening to the vendors, talking with the people, going up and down, and finding out the local on the ground strands in this governance formation. Yeah, there were people who, it's like when I got to the airport and saw my man Andre Perry, who is Brookings Institution, who was there working with the Greenwood Rise and stuff, trying to help raise some of that $105 million. Happy Lindsay, who is the CEO of a group in Philadelphia. They were all, I said, I didn't even know what y'all do. That wasn't, we were doing something. The Greenwood Rising is not what DeMario and them are doing. But if you're not walking and listening and talking with the people, it got clearer and clearer who we are to each other, who we are to other people. It's almost like the distance between the corner of Greenwood Archer, where the T-shirt shop is. Shout out to them. Shout out to my man Daniel, who sold me this Sunday afternoon. The Tulsa Greenwood Rising History Center, which ain't Black people, which is very interesting. Not to say it's not doing good work. There's a lot of Black people involved. The director is Black, but this is very
So
interesting.
to your point, what's also, I think, extremely for me, because you asked me, have I processed, and I'm still processing, and part of the process is what's our role in it? Because, I jumped into something with an idea, and then somehow we've weaved our way through and are connected to everything at the same time, and pulling people together that might not be pulled together. And it's humbling, but it's clear that we're in this for a reason. And it makes it a lot more rewarding when you realize, oh, okay, but for this, all of these I's would not have been dotted and T's crossed and circles formed. And now people get called in differently, and it's not acrimonious at all. It's like, hey, over here.
No.
You over here. Come on, get together, put your hands together and clap, and let's get busy. It's incredible. It's incredible. And I have not fully processed, and I'm still sitting in it.
We're all going to be both of us are going to be sitting in this for quite some time. I mean, it's going back through the compendium, and we talked about Black Wall Street in More Than Just Passing several months, like it was number 14 when we first had our first time. And then a year later, we did the Connecting Memorial Day in Black Wall Street, and that's where we talked extensively. So if y'all go to number 64, and then it just goes on, so and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, it wasn't at all clear. So the schedule that we received, that you passed on to us, and then I'm looking and saying, okay, is the gala on Friday, which we talked about yet last week. Then Saturday morning, there's the walkthrough, which, by the way, Tiffany hooked that up with us with Chief. And as we were going there, you're driving, me and Larry in the car, I look over by the Greenwood Rising Center, and who do we see? But Michael Lomax, the head of UNCF. I'm like, what's Mike doing over here? And then I'm like, what's Mike doing? And so as we're touring, I look from the distance and I see him again with a bunch of people. And I swear, now she will tell me, because I know a lot of people watch this and we'll get back to it. In fact, I need to text her separately. I thought, is that Jocelyn? Dr. Jocelyn Imani, who works with the National Historic Trust, does a lot of work at Jocelyn Fiskite. She was there when my sister worked at Fisk. I said, that can't be Jocelyn over there. Look, hey, y'all, just to be clear, y'all, for those of you who don't know, there were 5 people in Tulsa last week. We ain't talking about 1,000 people. It's 5 Black, and some kind of way. Now I get to remember. I'm saying that. So we didn't wait. We didn't. So that was Saturday morning, and then of course, because this is you, it's nobody else. In Class with Carr. Here we are, the two of us. You set it up so we could do it live. Shout out to the people you assembled to make that happen. And as I'm walking there from where we were for the tour, I pass a sign that has the Greenwood Rising. I go in the room, I go in the building, like, what's going on here? And I find out, this is where Tiffany, of course, Tiffany Cross was here. Tiffany and them are in this thing on the 6th floor doing a whole all-day symposium. That's how Mike and Karen and all them are there. Like, wait a minute, we're 3 blocks down the street from this. And I text Tiffany like, what? Yeah, what? Oh. So we did it. We do our thing, and then we go back for Dr. Crutcher's thing at 4. And okay, this we get, okay, that's all converged. And then Sunday morning, what we just saw, that clip, Shout out to Dr. Stanley, Thomas Stanley, who's down the street, George Mason, who, by the way, wrote an excellent book called The Execution of Sun Ra. We were talking about this, Sun Ra's birthday last week. So all this is kind of, and of course, Chief Homicide, Mama Joyce Smith-Williams, who was there at the gala and was here at everything. She set up the ancestor table. You see her there at the beginning. In fact, when you see that white reporter who was there, if you look over his shoulder, you see me standing there with Chief and them. But anyway, I'll get to that. That was on the schedule, but what you couldn't get a feel for is was the governance ritual. In many ways, that was the heart of the whole day. You wouldn't have known it. There was no way to know that unless you know. And then, of course, after that, I, walked the whole thing. We'll talk about that. But then they had a kickball tournament. I'm like, why are they having a kickball tournament in the baseball stadium? This is the Dodgers AA affiliate, the Tulsa Drillers. They got a baseball stadium where, of course, part of our community used to be. And you see the plaques in the ground where this used to be a business, this used to be a business, and it's surrounding this baseball stadium, very beautiful baseball stadium, but destruction, where we stood, where Chief had you stand against that picture of that little girl and say, see, you looking down the alley and she looking down the alley with the same look on her face. And across that little alley is a baseball stadium where they're going to have a kickball tournament that afternoon. And I'm like, okay. That was on the schedule, but what wasn't described is across the street from the baseball stadium is a restaurant owned by Kevin Johnson, former mayor of Sacramento, also all-star NBA player for the Phoenix Suns. Kevin Johnson's grandparents from Greenwood.
Did not know.
He got a soul food restaurant. None of this I'm telling, it was so much going on, bro.
That was, again, I could not have made this up. And at the same time, it is so important that we talk. There were different things happening that we all should have known were happening.
Yes.
And I didn't know all of the things were happening. And so in many ways,
nobody did.
Nobody knew all the things.
Nobody knew. Okay. No, you ain't alone. None of us knew.
So we got to do a much better job, of course. But it also speaks to, this is the thing that really, it bothers me, that there are so many people in their own silos that they don't lift their head up to say, I feel like I do a decent job of it, but I need to do a better job. Like, what are you doing? Come over here. Or what are you doing? Can I come over there? Like, can we, because this is how this all happened. I put my team on. I said, I want to do this listening tour. And I'm like, okay, what's happening in Tulsa? So Dr. Tiffany Crutcher, Demario, of course, and so we got involved.
Who are the anchors? Let's get that straight. They are the anchors of all of it. At
Correct.
The center of that are them. Yes.
So we were able to get involved in everything that they were already doing, especially we kicked off the Legacy Fest. On the Jumbotron. I came in, I was like, we're on the main stage. There's a giant Jumbotron with our face on it. And, I was like, oh, wow. Okay, Loree, let's go. We were like a mile away. We had to hijack somebody's cart to get to the stage to get there on time. But I sat there and was like really humbled that, okay. But I also was grateful because we can do all things. Obviously, literally in this little tiny, tiny stamp of a place in the world, all of this was going on in one weekend, and it was all full and complete, and everybody was doing their thing. But what would it look like if we all did our thing together? What would it look like if we all did it together? It would have been even more incredible.
Question. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we can. I mean, we're getting closer and closer to that, but that means we're getting closer and closer to the next major confrontation. We can't. In other words, I think the way things unfolded last week might have been the way they have to unfold at this moment. Because once you have a self-determining Black space or self-determining space, indigenous space, white supremacy has to come for you. So in other words, what happened at Standpipe Hill, where they did the soil collection ceremony, where a brother named Pegleg got on the top of that hill with a machine gun and said, I'm emptying my clip and killing as many people as possible to defend my town. That's what has to happen when it's clear that you're not diffused, where they can't see who's a friend or who's a foe, where they can't identify who's part of the governance form. So I'm not at all sure that this wasn't inevitable. I mean, it was while we were in Tulsa. If we had not been in Oklahoma last weekend, I would have been in New York. because that's where they had Baba. A shout out to Baba, aka Akinyele Umoja, to all of her attorneys, to her daughter who gave an incredible eulogy. Y'all can look at it online. Memorial to her mother, to Asada Shakur's Richie,
Yes.
and of course
And the
Angela Yvonne
Riverside Church.
Davis
Yeah.
at
Which
Riverside
was,
Church. We would have been there. We
so
would have
you
been
know,
there.
I had Dr. Rosemary Neely on,
Yes, you did.
to
Yes, yes,
like, so I'm like, oh, that's the same time. Oh, I'm gonna be so
absolutely.
I was in my mind while I was interviewing her about this. She was on to promote that Riverside Church memorial to Asada Shakur. I was like, damn, all these
Yeah.
things are going on at the same time.
It's going on at once, and they had that planned, of course. When I was in Atlanta with Quilombo and their work, Dr. Rosalind Satchel, who was there, who helped organize it. She said, "You're going to be in New York, aren't you?" In May. I said, "Oh yeah. The June 1st, May, the end of May 31st. Yeah. I wasn't even thinking about this. This was several months ago. But watch this. Angela Yvonne Davis spoke at Asada Shakur's memorial. You know where her sister was?
Tulsa.
Sonia Davis was dressed in white, putting soil in the jar. You see her in the ritual. Her and the Davis sister was in Tulsa, and the Davis was at New York. I'm saying this is all governance form, who we are to each other. It's very important. And you're right, we're all still processing in part because every layer reveals not differences, not fractures, but the continuities in the collective. So I'm not sure that if you get everybody in the same, now coordinate, yes, we got to know more about what's going on. We love to have a master calendar. We got to do all that. At the same time, they don't know which way to aim. Because you think that's so-and-so. No, that's who they are to you. You don't even know. We all texting each other while you thinking, ha, ha, ha. We like, yeah, ha, ha, ha. Okay, now where y'all gonna be at 2:00? This is so funny.
That's right.
Anyway.
That is right. That is right. And to your point, now we're everywhere all at once. We're everywhere.
Yes.
We're everywhere. We're everywhere. Yeah, it's hard to gather everywhere. It's hard to gather
Exactly.
everywhere.
Exactly.
Everyone is everywhere. No, you're so right. And the other thing, I've been talking about Tulsa since I started on the radio 12 years ago, because I was so outraged that I didn't know about it, that every day, every time, every anniversary I got to be on the radio, I was talking about it. This last weekend just really grabbed all of the things that were missing from my commentary when the chief walked us through that. So it's important. You can read a book. Books are important, but to stand on the ground, and you should get his book, and you got my book.
Yeah,
I can't wait.
I got you. Right there.
Look, I went to buy another
one.
I went to buy another one. That thing sold out. I said, man, damn it.
That's because he said go buy it. And everybody who was with us, about 50 people, went out and bought extra copies. And then they went and told people, right. So, Chief, we told you, Chief. See, that's another thing. They don't understand. When you say that, that's going to have a different... how many thousands and hundreds of thousands of copies have you moved just by saying this book? Yes, so Chief, you got a good problem, brother. You got to get that into print. Everybody want it. And everybody needs to have it.
Yeah. But the elements that he dropped on us, like the peg leg, the train tracks, the defense, because I have been talking about this, like we need self-defense. We had self-defense. He said, you're losing when you have to air bomb people. That's when you've lost. And we do know that Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We know that that's the last tactic, right? When you've lost, you're gonna, do horrific things, like even more horrific things when you can't beat somebody straight up, which says a lot, it says a lot about us. And so I just thank you, because we've walked through this, but walking through Galveston does something as well. Last year was Galveston. It was like, oh, wow. Juneteenth feels different now.
Necessary. It's necessary to slow it down and just walk it and just sit and be still. It's really the reason why being to be anchored in the experience. You're absolutely right. Books are important. In many ways, they're essential, but they are not the anchor. My whole life and whatever breaths I have left, I'm going to continue to spend it in reading and study, because That is a point of entry. It's a shorthand. It is a way to prepare yourself for the life to life experience. And by life to life, I don't mean just those of us who are walking on top of the earth for a short moment. I mean, everyone who has come before us and everyone who will come in our wake. That community is enhanced by study of all forms, and reading is only one form, but it is a very important form. And then you can prepare yourself. Now, I will confess, even as I'm thinking about the roots of the word confess in the Latin and the violent implications of word confess, I will witness the centering ritual for me, which is to be still, which was virtually impossible to do writing that at the gala. And again, thank you, you and Charles, for holding that down and continue and having the gala, the fundraiser there, Greenwood 120, move as it did. That was as close as I got Saturday before what I'll talk about in a minute to being still, was when you and I did what we always do, which is, of course, have our regular conversation Saturday, which we had twice or two times differently, of course. One before we took the tour to do what we do in the regular formation, which is what we're doing now, of course. And then after we had walked the grounds, another moment to be present, but not still in that sense. Because we couldn't be still. You certainly couldn't be still with Chief. I mean, you're at the center of it, and I'm there as well, but I'm trying to be on the periphery a little bit just to try to be still. With an extra day, I just would have gone down there, not told anybody where I was, just like absorbed step by step, breath by breath, just open up everything and let me just be in this space before everything. So it would have been really possible. Of course, we came back together for the live, the second live iteration, except we got to do it with everybody there, and respect to everyone who came for conversation, and both are was posted here in the Knarrative site, Nubia, and in the YouTube space. And after that, it was impossible to be still, of course. We were sitting there on that stage. And after that, though, that's when everything slowed down for me, because when we finished, I walked back over to the street festival and was talking with people, every 2 or 3 steps, getting stopped or stopping myself, asking questions. And I made my way back to the memorial, which I'll talk about in a moment. Everybody, again, just for those people who, didn't watch last week, or you're coming in now for the first time, wherever you are in the world, again, an anchoring objective, an anchoring part of our mission in this weekly heartbeat is to do that work, contribute rather to that work. We're all doing the work in one way or the other, but contribute to the work of memory building, to engender, to fuel that momentum memory. So we're talking about Oklahoma. We're talking about the city of Tulsa. And most importantly, a word, by the way, as Chief Egonwale Amosan reminds us, it comes from an indigenous word that connects directly to the forced displacement of indigenous and African people from the East Coast of the United States, particularly the Southeast, across the belly of the criminal enterprise into what was known as Indian Territory. Oklahoma, another indigenous word, but the word Tulsa derived in terms of its root. This week's theme is roots and branches. In many ways, Tulsa is a branch of a root of indigenous people in a region of Florida known by the name of what is now the city in which Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University resides. Tallahassee. Tulsa is a branch of a root word, Tallahassee. You see the indigenous imprints. You see it all over Oklahoma. But not just Tulsa, but Greenwood, which is why the good young brother Daniel, whose father started that T-shirt shop, it's at the corner of Greenwood and Archer. I'm putting it like there. Greenwood and Archer, right there at the corner, the north corner, is a T-shirt shop. If you're there, patronize all the businesses in what is often referred to as Black Wall Street, but not exclusively as Black Wall Street, because when you're in that part of the city, sure, you're in the greater Tulsa city, but you're in Greenwood, which is why I say, man, I need this hoodie, Greenwood, Oklahoma. You know what I'm saying? Not the Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa, which ain't no problem with that. That's beautiful, that too. But I like the idea of saying Greenwood. It's important. Just like Mama Joyce, who called in to Sirius XM on Thursday morning and with us, even as her son, one of her sons, DeMario Solomon Simmons, called in to debrief and talk. But he didn't know, I didn't know that Mama Joyce, who was one of the ancestral culture keepers, setting up shrines. I've seen those shrines set up all over the United States and in parts outside the United States by women of African descent primarily. And when I saw her tending the ancestor table on Sunday morning, that was very consistent with what she has done, but she doesn't herself a native of Washington, D.C. Mama Joyce is from Anacostia. If you know DMV, if you know the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia, if you know the District of Columbia, you know Southeast, one word, like Marionberry, one word. But you know also that in Southeast, there is a place in Southeast, much of Southeast, but certainly the heart of it, they call Anacostia, another indigenous word. That is where Cedar Hill is. Cedar Hill is Frederick Douglass' territory. Fred Douglass said Cedar Hill, and Mama Joyce told everyone on the radio Thursday morning about growing up in Anacostia, how he and the neighborhood children went in and out of Fred Douglass's house when she was a little girl. And they were allowed by the caretakers of the house to touch, to handle Fred Douglass's personal belongings. When you go to the Fred Douglass house now, under the custodianship of the National Park Service, Zoe, you ain't touched Fred Douglass's house, nor will you, you orange clown, if you continue to draw breath. And I hope you live another 50 years because I want you to see what's coming. I know we all know that's not going to happen, but I would love it because your world is crumbling. Even as we sit here, I told somebody yesterday, I certainly hope they'll give the signal as to when they're going to take his name off the John F. Kennedy Center, because I want to be down there to look at it. I was down there when they put it up. I want to see it when it come down. But you don't mess with Fred Douglass's house, bozo. You don't even, even though you think he's still doing great things, which he is from the ancestral realm. But Mama Joyce talked about being able to go in and out of that house, and the people who were responsible for taking care of it said, yeah, you kids can handle this stuff, because they knew that those young people wouldn't destroy anything, wouldn't tear anything out. But she says, a little girl, I touched all this stuff. If you ever go to his house, you'll see the books, you'll see his little weights he worked out with. She said, as children, we used to pick fruit off the trees in the yard to eat. This is before, as a young adult, she went west to Oklahoma to go to John Mercer Langston University, the university that Africans started in the 1890s. I think Langston was started in 1896 or 1897, which predates by over a decade, just about a decade, the birth of Oklahoma as a state. So let's say Greenwood, it's like saying Anacostia to those in DC. This is the governance formation. This is who we are to each other. Now, when you say that, you can also refer to the Greenwood section of Tulsa as Little Africa. There are many Little Africas around the United States of America. I'm reminded of one that comes immediately to mind is in Louisville. There are many places where Black people were forced to be and found community with each other through our governance formations, our ways of knowing, our cultural meaning making. Those places were often called Little Africa. I think about Louisville because that is one of the areas that African people found themselves in the United States of America that is highlighted by the great scholar Derek Bell. When you look at Derek Bell's book, his case book, which is currently being updated, Race, Racism, and American Law, it's one of the books I use when I teach the class I teach at Howard Law School. I use that book because it does a great job of segmenting out areas of the law that need to be talked about: education, housing, property, you know, administration of justice, all these things. So, at the beginning of the housing chapter, Bell refers to these little Africas. On my case book, I would pull it off one of these shelves over here. Y'all can't see, but he talks about these. Well, that is also a name that was used to describe what is often referred to as Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Greenwood. And I raise that because it's important for us to remember that there are things that we used ways and ways that we called ourselves out of governance formation. And then there are things that were used to describe us. And Little Africa in many ways was a term that might be used as a pejorative in social structure renderings, white nationalist renderings to be more specific. And of course, that is considered a pejorative among racists to call someone an African. I forget which film it was. Oh, The Siege. Remember The Siege with Denzel Washington and Bruce Willis, I think it was, and as Denzel Washington, who's playing the FBI agent, is being confronted by one of these military guys as they are going to extreme racial profiling, what we're seeing now in places like the Delaney detention facility in New Jersey. Bozo and his super clowns in the clown car, like Mark Wayne Mullen, the hillbilly hick who wants to shut down all the airports, at least take away all the customs agents as he chases the imaginary foe. Himself, Senator Mullen, from a former senator now directing Homeland Security, who says that he is Cherokee. But of course, the Cherokee have no determination of who is Cherokee and not based on blood. They don't do the blood quantum thing. You can be one billionth. I guess we're all Cherokee, aren't we, Mark Wayne? But you're white passing Cherokee, as when you read the reports and read the scholarship and read the people talking about it from that region. He said Mark Wayne Mullen is a white passing Indian, if he's an Indian at all. And that white passing includes a healthy dose of what they would call conservatism, what we would call calling a thing, white nationalism. But I'm raising all that to say that in that film, The Siege, where the government is now trying to lock you up if you're a Muslim, there's a scene in the film where the army guy looks at Denzel Washington and says, "You better be careful because I might decide that you're an Ethiopian." In other words, that you're somebody who needs to be locked up. You're an African. And Washington says to him, he says, "You're stupid enough to think that's an insult." Little Africa is not only not an insult, it's an honorific. So when we think about so-called Black Wall Street, and again, Chief Amundsen calls his book America's Black Wall Street, you see? And the untold story of broken treaties, Black resistance, political fear, and sacred ground. Chief Egunwale Amusan, as we started the tour last week, as he began the tour, I asked him, I said, "Now you have a Yoruba name. Do you mind sharing with us why?" And he said, "Oh yeah, thank you for asking that question. I am a Babalawo. I'm a Yoruba priest." That has taken on even an added significance Sunday morning because everyone there who conducted the ritual was dressed in white. They are part of a larger formation that we're going to talk about in a minute. And Sister Tiffany, in choosing him and making sure he was the one who gave us the tour, that was more than making sure he had some business or making sure that local people led and anchored us. That was also a spiritual. And it became so crystal clear Sunday morning. So, I see y'all now. This is the governance space. This is where the ways of knowing are. This is the beating heart of Little Africa. So standing there in Little Africa, reminded that of something that DeMario says in his book, Demon Nation, century-long battle to restore the soul of America. I'm reading it because the camera may invert this. So again, we're waiting on this other computer to come back up. So we're doing what we do this morning. But in this book, relation to Mario Solomon Simmons makes the point, when we call it Black Wall Street, it's important because it's an appellation people know, and it talks about Black progress and Black material progress, but he says it's important for us also to remember that the indigenous people who were forced into that space, which included, as Chief reminded us last week, the displacement of indigenous people who were already there. Understand, so when the Creek, the Chickasaw, when the Cherokee, when the Seminoles, when they are forced into that space, which includes many Africans, because remember, Dr. Mario Solomon Simmons is also Creek. When they were forced into that space, which includes the ancestors of Chief Amosan, whose people were also marked by the Creek. He's got people who were displaced as well who came into that region. And by the way, DeMario and Chief are cousins. That violence, as Chief reminded us, that this displacement that took place that resulted in the creation of this little Africa also contains this self-determination. And when DeMario talks about Black Wall Street, he always reminds us, Chief reminded us as well, when you call it Black Wall Street, don't mistake the appellation Wall Street, which reeks of capitalism, individualism, exploitation, pure profit for profit's sake. Even as we wait for the United States Supreme Court in the coming weeks, maybe next week, certainly by the end of June, to rule on 2 cases directly involving campaign finance, one of which is going to rule on whether there are any limits at all on these corporate donations. We're waiting on that. We're also talking about the birthright citizenship case that will come down, but we need to be paying attention to, there are 26 cases total that haven't been released yet. One of them will have to do, well, maybe 25 now, but has to do with unregulated capitalist buying of elections. I think we can all suspect what this white nationalist Supreme Court is going to do in regards to that case. But that don't mistake calling it Black Wall Street with this hyper-capitalist, hyper-individualist, exploitative, profit-driven, pure profit-driven enterprise, because the indigenous people who were here and who were forced here had no concept of individual land ownership. And if you read his book, and if you read other sources, you'll see talking about the Dawes Act and other things, where these Europeans split up the land into parcels and gave it to the indigenous people who were already there, who said no human being can own the land. The land is the land. We work the land and we're in community with nature. And then having divided it up, then say, well, you can sell your land ultimately to that, and then have these white settlers come in. Remember, Oklahoma is not a state until the end of the first decade of the 20th century. And by then, the indigenous people and the Africans have carved out space to operate. The Africans have started a university, Langston University, and founded a town, which is why DeMario calls the enterprise that they're engaged in right now Greenwood 120. We'll take it back to 1906, the formal founding of Greenwood. But all of this then makes it incumbent to refer to what is also called Black Wall Street as Greenwood, as Little Africa, which is what we saw on the memorial where we started our walking tour, where everyone starts in some ways across the path from the Greenwood Cultural Center. We're going to come to that in a minute. We'll talk about State Representative Don Ross, who made transition at the beginning of the month of May, and there we were at the end of the month of May, standing at a monument that he was able to get in place, this state representative, in 1996, 30 years before we stood there, along with the Greenwood Cultural Center, which is currently closed for renovations, but will be opening across from, as well, the Mabel Little home. We'll talk about Miss Mabel Little as well. So we were in many ways at the spirituals. Miss Little was often called the matriarch, Greenwood. And so we'll talk about all that in due course. But I want to read from the beginning of Keith's book, which is an excellent place to start because you don't have to unlearn so much. It's one thing for Karen Hunter or Greg Carr or the Reed Daniel Favors or any of us say we didn't know growing up about what happened here and what continues to take place here and who these people were and who they are not only as ancestors, but as the people who are on top of the earth connected directly to those ancestors. It's one thing for us not to know. It's one thing for those of us who are in this space by the thousands and more every week not to know. It's quite another thing for Demario Solomon, Tiffany Crutcher, her brother Terrence Crutcher, brutally murdered by Tulsa police. It's one thing for them not to know. That's why Tiffany started the Terrence Crutcher Foundation for his children, her nieces and nephews, and for the community around her and around us and around them. And of course, as Demario told us earlier this year, a couple of months ago, a major victory in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, stripping Miss Betty, the murderer of Terrence Crutcher, of her qualified immunity. Not sorry, very happy, in fact, returning that case to the lower court. So they're still fighting that war over the senseless murder, the wanton killing of Terrence Crutcher. But it's one thing for us not to know about Greenwood and what happened there and how it was founded and all the things that happened, the destruction of Greenwood in 1921, the rebuilding of Greenwood subsequently, and then the second attempt to destroy it in the 1960s. It's one thing for us not to know. It's quite another for them not to know. In the shadow of Langston University. So there's no shame in not knowing, but there is shame in becoming aware and not pursuing strengthening the knowledge. I have no problem in saying that once we know, we should be ashamed if we don't pursue strengthening that knowledge. And so, Prof, when you say you're sitting with it, you're processing, I am too. And I knew a lot about it. Names and dates, sure. Dick Rowland's story, of course. We talked about it. Again, I encourage you all, go back to session 14, 1-4. We hadn't been at this 4 months in 2020 when we talked about it. And then a year later, remember that was 2020. 2021 was the 100th anniversary of what happened from the end of May to the first day of June 2021. So we spent an extensive time talking about this in session number 64, connecting Memorial Day and Black Street. We talked about Mary E. Jones Parrish, the sister who survived the race war in Little Africa and collected testimony, connected witness of those who survived. The first book on Wall Street, who Chief thanks in his acknowledgments. He thanks those culture keepers. In fact, let me just do this by way of a verbal libation, because as I stood there, as we started the walking tour with him on Saturday, I resisted the urge to say, Baba, would you and your son pour a libation before we set foot, before you say anything else? I resisted that urge because it wasn't necessary, because it was a verbal libation, every word he said. And of course, the next morning, I was satisfied because that libation was there at the interment. I mean, not the interment, at the collection of soil. Here are the acknowledgments that Chief writes about in his book. He says, I'm indebted to Mary Parrish, Mabel B. Little, Buck Franklin, A.J. Smitherman, Dorothy DeWitty, Ron Wallace, and Eddie Faye Gates for their invaluable contribution of ancestral knowledge to this book. These are some of the major historians. In a moment, we'll talk about Eddie Faye Gates. We talked about her in number 64. This is one of her many books. This is her book, Ride on Greenwood, the Total Destruction of Black Wall Street. Eddie Faye Gates, the name you should know. If you want to look at her family history, here's a book that one of the many ones I happen to, Ancestors Don't Make No Mistakes. I had this one around. It's called Miss Lucy's Cookies and Other Links in My Black Family Support System. This is a master historian of Tulsa. Here she is on the back of the book. That's Eddie Faye Gates. In a minute, you're going to see her again with the brother who made it possible to get the resources from the tax money of Oklahomans to build the monument that we stood at, denoting not the Tulsa Race Massacre, but the Tulsa Race War. Chief explained to us, calling it a war because this was a war between the European predators and the state and the city of Oklahoma, which Chief says in this book. He says the people now, current white Tulsa, said we didn't do it, and when he said no. The perpetrator is Tulsa. Tulsa declared war on Greenwood, not just individuals, but Tulsa, which means Tulsa is guilty. It's very interesting, these politics as they emerge, because you absolutely see the distinction between who we are to other people, social structure, and who we are to each other, governance. But as he says here, these people that he just named are all ancestors. And they are part of our community, because in our ways of knowing, an ancestor is equally, if not stronger, equally strong, if not stronger than those who walk on top of the earth. That's why we call them. That's why we feed them. That's why we tend to them. And that's why, in turn, they protect us, make the way for us. He goes on and says, to my beloved parents, Raymond Beard Jr. and Sarah Beard, you have my unending gratitude. Thank you for teaching me to honor my roots and effectively employ my own words. Ifa Kemi Amusan, my beloved wife, shout out to you as well, sis. It was beautiful to meet you Good morning. Thank you for your tolerance and support throughout this arduous. You are my crown's guardian. My crown's guardian. That's a point of entry. If you know, you know. Next sentence, massacre survivor Wes Young, my adoptive grandfather, whose words never let them forget us, etched into the pages of this book. Thank you. He goes on, thanks a bunch of other people, but never let them forget us. That, of course, is a variation on the title of Mother Fletcher's book, or Fletcher. Let them bury my story. We won't. He begins the book by saying, whenever I go to Oak Lawn Cemetery in Tulsa, Oklahoma, keep Oak Lawn Cemetery in your mind. We'll come back to Oak Lawn in a moment. He says, I pour libations in honor of those buried in mass graves while praying in the native Yoruba tongue, Sunreo, Sunreo. That's the song you heard being played in that little 2-minute clip from the reporter at the beginning when we started a moment ago. You hear them singing. What does Sunreo mean? It means rest in peace. In my community, I'm called chief because I am a trained and initiated chief in the Society of African Ancestral Wisdom. That's the society that conducted the ritual on Sunday morning. He said, this is the wisdom of spiritual continuity and ancestral veneration. Roots, roots, roots. He goes on and says, my title is Allah Agba, which in context means elder custodian of those who have passed on. I would also connect him to the Djalis, because he told us, he says, I'm not a historian, I'm a cultural memory specialist, recovery specialist. Yes, Baba, in terms of the English language, but you are a Djali. Djali, one of the many variations on the word, which Europeans might call, or those of us who have been diseducated by them might call historians. Some people make the unnecessary intervention to say oral historians, mouth to ear history. History, historia, from the Greek, to know by writing. The word history literally is commingled with the concept of writing, of books. So to be an oral historian is a bit of an oxymoron. Let's just say Djali. Djali in West Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, other places, as we talked about many, many times, the great memory keeper, Amadou Hampâté Bâ. That word literally means blood. And when you look it up and when you ask people, the Bambara, Bamana, Angie Porter reminds us, Bamana people, Djali mean blood. The function of a memory keeper in a society, the function of that way of knowing in a governance formation, who we are to each other, where we govern ourselves, self-determine ourselves. The function of a memory keeper is the same in a community as the function of blood is in our physical bodies. It circulates and allows us to live by regulating everything that takes place, by connecting everything that takes place in our form, by absorbing everything that we consume and converting it into life-giving forces, or rejecting those things that don't. The blood, get your blood tests. In many ways, study is a form of testing your blood. Need that tonic of study as well to enhance that blood. So whether someone would say that Chief Amusan is a historian or not is an irrelevant question in a governance formation. He is a Djali, and in the Yoruba tradition, which means custodian of those who have passed on. I feel a special stewardship, he writes, for those who lie in unmarked graves and in mass burial sites like Oak Lawn and other places in Tulsa. In that morning ritual, Sunday morning, when we were standing there, after they had conducted the prayers, they sang the songs in Yoruba and then mixed in some of, talk about ways of knowing, the songs that Africans here in the United States learned and repurposed and created in terms of cultural meaning making in the so-called Black church. They did that. They then allowed each of us there to take some dirt in our hands or in the little shovel and put it in one of three jars. One jar, Mother Viola Ford Fletcher. One jar, Mr. A.C. Jackson. And another jar that said for all of the others who lie in the unmarked graves, whose names have not yet been matched. And in that moment, what we saw when we were in Montgomery, and anyone who goes to Montgomery, Alabama, to the EJI, Equal Justice Institute Legacy Museum, and you see the jars of soil, two of which were there on Sunday morning there, Standpipe Hill in Greenwood. You know that all of that soil and all of those jars in the museum there, in the Legacy Museum, came from places where rituals of collection were conducted. And in the case, Standpipe Hill, there are jars in Montgomery with soil for representing the commingled DNA and the burial and final resting place of these Africans, some who are named and many others who are not. And you see that in Montgomery. And in that moment, I got a chance to see it. And as I said to Dr. Crutcher, as I said to Tiffany, and I said to Chief Sunday morning, I said, read it, I've studied it, I've been in Montgomery, been in that space. You all know I have my own perspective on that, which I think is a valid one in terms of the overemphasis of trauma in that space, a thing that I think they have begun to address. Because as I asked some of the folks who have been there, including Nana Joyce, what they thought of the space at the Legacy Museum with art and music and ancestors around the walls, they said that wasn't there initially. And I say, good. I think that's in response to an attempt to balance that. I think the good brother Brian Stevenson and his curators are, you got to balance that, because the trauma cannot be how we enter history, how we enter memory. But Sunday morning, I got a chance to see the origin of some of that soil. And in that moment, as I said to them, it really deepened my respect, awareness, grounding in the governance notion. What is in Montgomery is a spiritual site. It is a new spiritual site as it brings these energies into the place. But if you think of it like a wheel, as the Montgomery area and the Montgomery monuments are creating new centers, the center of where the things in Montgomery are convening, the place they come from is the real hub. Greenwood is a hub, sending representatives into Montgomery to join with the hubs that are already in Montgomery because they're indigenous people, Africans, and strengthening. So it's a governance, in a governance discussion, in an Africana studies discussion, grounded by those conceptual categories. The governance space is the space where the communities are. They connect to those spaces. And it was just a very powerful moment. And so the Africana studies framework does not center a materialist perspective. It is not a materialist approach. And so it's important to understand that these Africans are very connected to our ancestors, to those who are unborn, and to the people who are doing this living and dying and struggling now. And in that ritual, after folks put soil into these three jars, I got there, my turn to come put a little soil in Mother Fletcher's jar, Mr. Jackson's jar, and in the anonymous jar, I used my hands, as so many before me had done, as I'm observing them, got on my knee too, put a little in, put a little in, put a little in. In that moment, I was reminded of the funeral of Elaine Leroy Locke, his ashes, which had not been placed in a grave until about maybe 10 years ago, the Congressional Cemetery, where we all got a chance to put some soil into his grave. And in that moment, I was there again. And at every funeral I've ever been to, including my mother and father, where you touch that dirt, my Aunt Lillian, Aunt Possum, as we call her, who put that dirt in there. And in that ritual of soil collection, in that moment I was there, and then we stood back. They sang some more songs. It was beautiful. And there's some footage, maybe in an office hours. Here's some of it. I'm going to do it this morning because that report, that little 2-minute report, was a nice summary. You got a chance to get a little bit of a feel for it. And then there was a moment where the chief called everybody to attention and said, now we're going to do a final prayer. And as he did that, he instructed, and Dr. Crutcher instructed 3 people to hold their jars. So sister had Mother Fletcher's jar. The sister had the jar representing all the Africans who have yet to be named, what we know are there. In fact, Chief says in his book, the whole city of Tulsa is a cemetery. And the 3rd jar, he gestured toward me and said, he gave me the jar of A.C. Jackson. A.C. Jackson was buried in that mass grave in Oak Lawn Cemetery. One of the things that Chief Amusan talks about in this book is how it has been a war to force the city of Tulsa and the government to exhume graves, to look for mass graves across the city, especially Oak Lawn Cemetery. And Chief has been part of that leadership, the formal leadership to require it. He told us a story of bringing people into the cemetery, and they simply stopped and lay and did a ritual, and come to find out immediately after that, that is where a number of bodies had been discovered. There was no radar, there was no sonar, there was no, technology except the ultimate science and technology, which is the way of knowing of African people, to say something says, not somebody, our ancestors said, stop here, lay down here. This is where my remains are. Even as I am no longer there, I am there as well. And they found those bodies. A.C. Jackson is the first African buried in one of those mass graves who was matched by DNA from the soil to his name in 1921. As I stood there with that glass jar holding that earth in my hands, what can you do but weep? I want to thank you, Chief. I want to thank you, Baba. Thank you, Mama Joyce and Tiffany, and everyone else in that circle, for everyone there being able to bear witness, and for you to place that jar in my hands for a couple of minutes. That is not an honor. That is an instruction. Of course, it's an honor, but most importantly, it is an entrustment with an expectation. I'm telling you that story to remind all of us that we have been entrusted by our ancestors with a great responsibility. He said, don't let them bury my story. Baba was told by a survivor, don't let them forget me. It's not going. There's a sister named Christy Williams. I was reading one of the interviews from a previous iteration. They do this every year. It seems to me that May 31st ritual at Standpipe Hill Park is something that really should not only be emphasized, but stressed for people outside. Because the people, the governance formation, the ways of knowing folk, the keepers, and understand that this formation that Chief is a part of go around the country. As I sat there and listened and talked with them and listened to them talking, they don't just do that in Tulsa. They do it in Algiers in Louisiana. They do it in places in Texas. They are part of an international network. I know the sisters here in DC who do it. I know Sister Latrella Thornton, who sets up our ancestor shrine for the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. I know the people in Chicago who do it, who will be doing a version of it this weekend at the celebration of the life of Mama Muriel Bala. I know Larry Crow, Kwaku Larry Crow, and Mama Labisi who do it in Dayton. I mean, there are many people. I started naming people in Nashville, Los Angeles, Detroit. Know those people. And now becoming aware of this group, it just reinforces the fact that we have to have these rituals. And so just very important. So when this Sister Christy Williams in a previous ritual said, you are in Little Africa and there's a fire that still burns in Little Africa. Oh my goodness, I understood it. Understood it. It's so important. I'm sorry, I was joining Dr. Andrew A.C. Jackson, who is one of the people, of course, at the center of this. The soil I held was from C.L. Daniel. C.L. Daniel was the first name to be recognized in Oak Lawn Cemetery. Forgive me, ancestor. Forgive me, Baba. C.L. Daniel. So it's very important to understand, helping to fill those jars. C.L. Daniel was the first victim identified. And when was he identified? He was identified in July 2024. This just happened. That soil containing some of his DNA, C.L. Daniel, was confirmed as the first victim confirmed in that mass grave in Oak Lawn Cemetery in July 2024. So standing there at the foot of Standpipe Hill, where Peg Leg Taylor, remembered by, among others, Otis G. Clark, defended Greenwood with a machine gun, drug that machine gun to the top of that hill, fed those bullets by those who accompanied him, and defended Greenwood from the invading army of whites, aided and abetted by the state and the government in a race war, massacre. Many Africans fell. The total number may never be known. However, many were displaced. The total number may never be known, but let's be crystal clear. We have always fought back. It's very important to understand. So after leaving there, and I waited until almost everybody was gone. Let me take a walk. Because now, unlike Friday night, when everybody was there and it's a beautiful energy and we're all talking, and there's very much, we talked all about that last Saturday morning. Y'all go back and look at the in-class conversations that you and I had prior. Unlike Saturday morning when we left there and were on skates all the way through until the Fantasia concert happened, where Fantasia was the headliner at the evening concert. By then, all the other things that happened during the day were done. And as I'm walking back, because, I walk the place, I'm walking back. I'm going to walk back to the hotel. I stopped for about an hour back at the monument and sat there. And by the way, in between those times, I stopped at a bookstore. In fact, DeMario, we were laughing about that Thursday morning. I'm walking from Greenwood, the center heart of Greenwood, past that baseball stadium, looking at these plaques, past the place where Tiffany and Mike and all them, DeMario and all them were for the thing that they were doing. And as I'm walking toward where we're going, see a bookstore. So, of course, I'm going in the bookstore. There was a couple of cats who were with us, who were in Nubia. Shout out to y'all who came with as it was walking. And as we stopped, we were going in the bookstore. Okay, they got a shelf of books. Actually, before that, I walked across to the Greenwood Rising Museum. We'll come back to that in a minute. Went in there just to see. They have some great exhibits. But I had time to just go because, I'm going to the museum. I want to go. I'd already been told by the people, again, governance formation, what that relationship of that museum is to the neighborhood across the street. Because remember, Greenwood separates, not completely, because there are places on that side of the street of Greenwood where there were Black businesses too. I'll talk about that in a minute. But that Greenwood Rising History Center is different from the stuff that's going on across the street in the Black community. even as it is a vital place to think about what happened in Greenwood and to talk about reconciliation, all that. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. So I went in there, I saw a nice book display, and the lady, the sister, was sitting there, was like, "Oh, you interested in any of those books?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely. I'm just looking for the ones I don't already have." And there weren't any. So, okay, so let me go now. So as I'm walking now, fast forward now, but now we're walking down the street. We passed the baseball stadium. We passed the place where they're having the symposium, the other symposium, and then we're headed toward where you and I are going to talk, Prof. And I go in this bookstore, white bookstore, don't matter, because I'm looking for the black bookstores. We'll talk about that in a minute too. But they got books on Greenwood and Tulsa and Black Tulsa. There's an excellent book called Tulsa 2021, which gives you a sense of the contestation between the governance formations and the social structure formations. This is a conversation I might even revisit next week because we are now in the corridor, y'all. We are in June, semi-quincentennial bozos. 8 Fest is falling apart, even contradicting themselves in the same sentence. Hillbilly wrestlers are saying government shouldn't be using resources for sports and entertainment. They should be using them to defend us. It's the same guy who praised Hitler at some point. I'm talking about this WWE guy. I'm not even gonna name him. And so I mean, hey, but even the broke clock is right twice a day, because in the same breath, if he kept talking, it could have been also, and I don't think the government should be involved in anything. We don't need no vaccines. And but for that bleak moment, people say, oh, look, this is even he has said that Bozo's wrestling thing is falling apart, even as he says he's gonna keep that silly ass thing that he done built down there in front of the house that he's tearing up. Your house, he tearing up y'all house. I don't give a damn. But he tearing up y'all house, even as he said that may be permanent. Even as now, I just read this morning, the Federal Aviation Administration is saying if you do build that arch, that silly ass arch, and they're talking about coating, if you've ever been on that bridge that goes to the cemetery, the National Cemetery, Arlington, you know that there are two like lions and humans standing there, two dudes with lions, and they look old, they've worn down. At one time, apparently, they had gold leaf on it, and that's been eroded. Well, now he wants to put 14 karat gold on them again and put a big ass arch that's huge, so big, in fact, the FAA says you got to put red lights on it, red flashing lights. It's too close to DC National Airport. Anyway, in all this process, you got to remember that we are in June. June is now entering the quarter. In a couple of weeks, we come into Juneteenth, which enters the 2-week quarter between who we are to each other and who we are to other people. Because at the end of that 2-week quarter, after the 19th of June, is the 4th of July. What a spectacle. And I intend on bearing witness to whatever Bo is going to try to pull off, even as everything falls apart, as even the guy who led CNC Music Factory sitting on the toilet is like, I ain't going, maybe I will go, whatever, dude. The Commodores done pulled out. Oh, it's beautiful. Everybody, whatever. But my point is this. In these moments, we are now in the corridor. And as the more I thought about it this weekend in Tulsa, the more I thought about the fact that in many ways, May the 31st and June the 1st, May 30th, the 31st, and June the 1st, in some ways can become the ritual for governance, self-determination formation among Africans here in the United States, can become a marker for entering the month of June that is then reinforced by Juneteenth. So there is another corridor of a little under 3 weeks between May 31st and June 19th that we can begin to think of as a convening in terms of governance and movement and memory to consider these things. Perhaps Greenwood can be the kickoff to Juneteenth. Have us reorient even as we are thinking about our liberation struggle, and render July 4th inert, except for a 2-week conversation about who we are to other people as we renegotiate the terms of this criminal enterprise. Okay, so in this process then, I said the book Tulsa 2021, I think I will revisit that between now and Juneteenth. It's a book worth reading and talking about, because it's talking about these kind of contesting ideologies, the things that converge and the things that don't. But after the ritual Sunday morning, for the first time, except for that about hour and a half, on Saturday evening, after Karen the Reed, myself, DeMario, Tiffany, Mr. Regina Goodwin, who I'm going to come back to in a moment, and the brother who's the vice chair of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, had our public conversation there on the same stage Fantasia came from. As we got off there, and I walked back and came up and down in the street festival and talking with folks. Here we are. I think it blinked a little bit. Everybody's there. All right. I want to make sure because it could be they restored the internet. I'm going to check with my computer here. If they did, I might take a moment and switch, or I might not. Give me a second, y'all. 3, 2, 1. No, it ain't been restored. I just wanted to make sure. All right. So after that, I said, I'm going to walk back. I'm going to walk back to the hotel. So I'm coming out. Just said, no. Before I come out of Greenwood, I'm going to sit here back at this monument and be quiet for a minute. Because I've been able to go into the Mabel Little home. It was so powerful. And shout out again to the Anellis, to Aya Anelli, to her parents, Dr. Eniola Fubara, and her father, Dr. Jim Fubara, who were there, and to their kids who came to the in-class conversation. And Karen, you set off a lot of praise and celebration there in Killeen, Texas, because Anna Anelli, who was headed to Meharry, the doctor, her friends started reaching out to her again. That reach can't be underestimated, because as you talked about her this week on the radio, because she asked a question and made some observations about her generation and asked what can they do in their live in class. Y'all can see that as well. Both those sessions are posted on Knarrative. And then answering her, and then you brought her up this week, and her friends called and said, he talked about you on the radio. It's like, and so he went back and listened. But shout out to them, because they had visited the Mabel Little Heritage House the day before. And I hadn't get a chance to go because, we were obviously landed in on Friday and went through. So that moment of stillness, I was able to go to the Mabel Little Heritage House. It was built by Sam and Lucy Mackey in 1925. 1925, of course, 4 years after the Tulsa race war, and Africans had begun to rebuild what had been destroyed by these Europeans in the race war, which is the way it is described on the monument. We'll come to the monument in a minute. Come to several monuments in terms of movement and memory and cultural meaning making. And that little house is in the style of the houses that were destroyed, and was rebuilt by Lucy Mackey and her husband Sam to be the house, the house that was destroyed. So it is the house that is in that corridor that is called, often referred to as Black Wall Street, that is in that corridor in Little Africa, that symbolizes what was before 1921 and what was rebuilt after 1921. It's very important. So I sat there at the monument, rereading what we had read earlier that day, and being able to be still. And I watched people come and go, take pictures, Tulsans. And now here come the people. When we were there Saturday morning on the tour, there were people there, but most of the people from out of town. As the day unfolded and the festival unfolded, more and more people from Tulsa were there. More and more people from the neighborhood were there. By the time 4 o'clock came, we were up there having this conversation, and Professor Hunter, you had the QR code up on the screen, and people were writing in questions and comments, and we were interacting with folks, and you talked about electoral politics, you and Larry with Senator Goodwin, State Senator Regina Goodwin. More and more people are coming. But as the sun started settling a little bit, because it was hot, it licked on the low end of 90. It was humid. Even DeMario, who from there, saying, this is hot for us. And I'm like, man, I'm loving it. I got my jeans on. You don't care. I like hot weather. Love it, in fact. Don't like it. Love it. Even as that was going on, more people were coming. More and more people are coming. And then, as the sun started lowering down, as I'm sitting there at the monument, here come the community in full force, because they come in to see Fantasia. The babies, the elders, the people in the kind of clothes that you wear when it's hot as hell outside and you 21 years old and you don't care. I mean, all the people, the baby strollers, the wheelchairs, okay, here come the people. Now, I didn't stay for Fantasia. I walked on out and came on across the street. As I came across the street, I saw the sister who's the president of the Association of Black Journalists, Sister Tiffany Cross, like you said. Karen is sitting there with Mike Harriet, Charles Coleman, who had co-emceed with you the night before. They all sitting there at a restaurant, and I'm sitting there talking to a sister who is an elected official in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and her husband. They all sitting there. I'm like, they're like, what you doing? I said, what you doing? I didn't even know I have y'all was here. I knew y'all 4 or 5 were here, but they said, where y'all come from? Across from the Greenwood Culture Center. And I'm just laughing aside. Then we talked for a minute. Then I kept going. They went to get something to eat, and I just kept going. But in that process of sitting still at the monument, I began to unravel some of the things that I had begun to discover. Some things I knew, other things I didn't know. And in that little bookstore that I found between where the one symposium was and where we were having a conversation, I did find a couple of books I did not have. This is one of them, Pillage of Hope. Pillage of Hope. This is by Don Ross. The excellent book to get. Don Ross was an Oklahoma state senator for 20 years. If you remember, as we stood there in that circle around that obelisk, that kind of obelisk-shaped memorial that had the names of all the businesses that were in Tulsa by 1921, that said the Tulsa Race War at the top. You remember, of course, and we all remember who were there and those who have been here, that at that monument there in the heart of Little Africa, right across from it is the Greenwood Cultural Center. That's the one that was built in the Black community for Black people. And Don Ross got the funding for it and for the monument. So I'm reading Don Ross in a book I hadn't seen anywhere else other than that bookstore there in Tulsa. And in this book, let me just show you a few pictures here, Don Ross. Here is Representative Ross in the Oklahoma legislature. In 1989, he forced the state of Oklahoma, he was able to get the state of Oklahoma through lobbying and pushing and pulling to take down the Confederate flag that was on the state grounds. This is before even South Carolina. There was one in Oklahoma. Of course there was. Here he is with Jesse Jackson. And remember, Don Ross just became an ancestor. So him and Jesse Jackson, ancestors in the last month and a half or so, because Don Ross made transition May the 6th this year. And on that monument, there's a little block right in front of the monument that says, this is dedicated by Don Ross. This was dedicated in 1996, the same time they got the Greenwood Cultural Center. There's a Greenwood Rising Museum and Cultural Center, History Center across the street from Little Africa. And then in Little Africa proper, there's a Greenwood Cultural Center, governance, who we are to each other. It's being renovated. We'll come back to that in a minute as well. He was the principal fundraiser, Don Ross, for the Greenwood Cultural Center. Pillage of Hope, a family history from the Trail of Tears, slavery, segregation, the 1921 race massacre, and beyond. He starts this book. Chapter 1. Big Mama knew white folk. Big Mama governance, cultural meaning making, ways of knowing, not your blood mother, but your blood mother's mother, your blood father's mother. Big Mama, that's what we call Mama Gussie Hayes in Alabama. My mother's mother. My mother's mother's grandfather was a Creek Indian. So I got bloodlines that come out of Oklahoma, come into Oklahoma as well through one trail, I'm sure. Because many Creek were marched out to the territory, but he was a Creek that didn't get marched out because we all didn't get marched out. We all weren't there, and these contentious issues continue. That's why DeMario is in court now saying you got to recognize the Black Creek, and we get the benefits that everybody else benefits. I'm gonna come back to that in a minute too, as it relates to Greenwood. Some things I saw as I was walking on both sides of the sidewalk, reading the plaques as to where the businesses were that were destroyed and where the businesses were that were destroyed that rebuilt themselves. Yeah, I'm coming back to that in a minute. Thanks, Eddie Gates. So this is how Don Ross, State Senator Don Ross, State Legislator Don Ross, at the beginning of his book, Big Mama Knew White Folk, he says, my grandmother's family arrived in Indian territory with the Creek Indians. Some were slaves. Others were freedmen and tribal members. My slave ancestors, William and Affie Bruner, were ultimately freed before the Civil War by their owners, and my grandmother eventually prospered. But in 1921, she lost everything to the infamous events that came to be known as the Tulsa Race Riot. Over the course of 2 days, white Oklahomans attacked the Greenwood section of Tulsa, then the nation's most prosperous Black community, burning or bombing businesses and homes and injuring or imprisoning thousands. Before the September 2001 attack on New York's World Trade Center in the 1921 Tulsa Race War was called the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil since the Civil War. As many as 300 persons may have been murdered in the riot. And he goes on. He says, I didn't learn about it. Only later did I learn how it directly affected his family. This is a book that has chapters like this. Big Mama Knew White Folk, My Family on the Trail of Tears, Oklahoma, A Black Blessing, Bloodline, Thicker Than Water, Black Wall Street's Dark Side, Tale of a Race War, Outgunned and Outlawed, Blacks Instigate Riot, the 60s. Here's the turn. They destroyed Black Wall Street. They rebuilt it, y'all. Chapters 9, the 60s. Chapter 10, Black Wall Street Forgotten. Chapter 11, A Black Quota. 12, Riot Scars. 13, Riot Impact. 14, Reparations. Doomed. Mario talking about reparations. It's not Greenwood Rising. This is the Tulsa Reparations Initiative. Chapter 15, Blacks Salute Confederacy. Chapter 16, Memorial Without Eulogy. And then he goes into the rest. This is Don Ross. Don Ross is the one who principal fundraiser for what we saw there. Now, as I'm looking at these books, I'm connecting to what we had seen there. Mabel Little, Don Ross, all of the people. And shout out, by the way, to the young sister whose mother runs the Mabel Little home. He gave me the tour while I was there. I got a chance to come in, paid my admission fee, an exorbitant fee of $5 US, and got a chance to just be in that space. It was so very important. By the way, as I said, Sam and Lucy Mackey built the house in 1925. Mabel Little was from Boley, Oklahoma. That's who the house is named for now, as a tribute to her. Boley, Oklahoma, by the way, is the birthplace and home of the great Dr. Nathan Hare, professor social sciences at Howard University, who was let go unceremoniously by the petty bourgeois Negro haters at Howard. They accused him of being one of the people who helped foment student unrest in the period 1966, 1967. He then went to San Francisco with his bride, with his partner, with his comrade, with, of course, the great Julia Hare, who was from Greenwood. And together, they did the work that resulted in the creation of the first department-level Black Studies program in the country in San Francisco State University, 1968. Roots and branches. So Boley, Oklahoma, where Mabel Little is from, same place that Dr. Nathan Hare is from. He lived to be 104 years old. Mabel Little, businesswoman, entrepreneur, woman of faith, in terms of ways of knowing, known as the matriarch of Black Wall Street. So again, I found this book by Representative Ross. I'm like, oh, this is good. And then I found a couple of other books that I hadn't seen anywhere. This is Don Thompson's book, Hush, Somebody's Calling My Name, a photographic essay of survival, resilience, and perseverance. Because again, 1921, they destroyed it, but then they rebuilt it. They rebuilt it. And this here, ooh, this is basically pictures, photographs. And so I'll show you a few of them. Of Greenwood. Starts with this boy who's on the cover, right? This young man. The Shine Parlor, talk about shoe shine. They got a shoe shine shop, imitation shoe shine shop set up in the Tulsa Greenwood Rising History Center. It's 1970. They rebuilt. So near, so far, a man walks along the old Caddy Railroad tracks as it winds behind Greenwood's commercial district. In the background stands the old National Bank building. I sat at the railroad tracks. In fact, I sat there because as I was walking back, the train came and the people were trying to rush it to get past the railroad track to get to the Fantasia concert. And when it became clear, as the train got too close, they had to stop. And I'm just sitting there on the corner watching all these Africans getting ready to come here and watch Fantasia while the train goes past, and I just close my eyes. In that moment, I was in North Nashville, where the train tracks come close to Pearl High School. I was in that moment in Knoxville as those train tracks come and cross where Black communities used to be. As I used to sit there all the time when I would come to Knoxville and stay before we went out to do the National Freedom Schools training in Clinton, Tennessee. As I sat there, I could see the railroad tracks in every place I've been where those railroad tracks been. I just let myself be in all those places at the same time as these Africans lined up. And as that long train finally passed, and then as the guardrail went up the barrier, they came running across. They get into Fantasia. These the Africans who do the living and dying in Tulsa. Many of them, none of them, I suspect, maybe one or two was at the gala. I don't know if any of them were at the tour, but they coming to see Fantasia. They weren't at the symposium. I'm saying this is the thing that we have to do. And as I sat there, a brother passed by and said, "Hey, Dr. Carr, what's going on, brother?" "Man, y'all keep doing what y'all doing." "Yes, sir. Enjoy the show." I don't know that brother. He don't know me. I know that brother. And he knows me and you, Prof, and he knows all the rest of us. The whole point is, I don't care. All of my friends, first class, top shelf, brilliant academics, intellectuals, read your books. One of the 500 people who bought a copy, because I'm an academic too, but let's be crystal clear. That right there, that's why we continue to draw breath and do what we do. I'm not making a difference, although there is a difference. I'm making and emphasizing a point. Jailbreaking means we have to continue to do that. So if you're watching, bruh, I hope y'all enjoyed the show, because I know you Negroes was out late as hell, because the sun by then was just about down and they was coming. As Sterling Brown said, they don't come by twos or threes. Shine Parlor, you talking about Africans. Here's another one. But I could go through these pictures. Here's Mr. Smith, who owned one of the few remaining businesses left on Greenwood. During the late 60s, urban renewal began to systematically force many Black-owned businesses to close in the name of so-called urban progress. A few weeks later, after many years, that location too was gone at the shoe parlor. Shoe service. Now, I'm going to talk about some of these businesses in a minute. The barbershops, the restaurants. I'm going to go now to some of the people, because in this, it's really just pictures of many of the things that were there. Deep Greenwood, 1978. Deep Greenwood is where we were, the business district. It was part of, at one time, 33 blocks. I want you to see this picture right here. You see that building there, that flat building? That's the home of the Oklahoma Eagle. We saw the old Eagle building, Prof, when we were coming, when you were parking, when we came to do the tour. And I asked somebody, I said, why did they move the Oklahoma Eagle building? In fact, the headquarters, I spoke to a young lady who was a reporter for the Eagle. We'll talk about the Eagle in a minute as I look at the clock, and we're going to kind of begin to wind up. He said, I'm not sure why, because I just moved here a few months ago. I'm a reporter for the Eagle. The headquarters of the Oklahoma Eagle now are not in the building. The headquarters of the Oklahoma Eagle are now on the second and fourth floor of the place run by the University of Tulsa, where, Prof, we were at the gala night. Eagle, Black-owned newspaper, the 10th oldest Black newspaper in the country. And of course, 2027 marks the 200th anniversary of the Black press, if we date it with a beginning that starts with John Russwurm with Freedom's Journal and Sam Cornish. No longer do we want others to speak for us, social structure. We will speak for ourselves, governance. That 200th anniversary is next year. And of course, we'll talk about that extensively as we get into it. But the Eagle is the 10th oldest paper owned by Africans in the country. And we'll talk more about what that means and what the paper was that preceded it, because one of the descendants we talked to, in fact, I talked to her before we got on stage, her grandfather started the Oklahoma Eagle, which came into existence in 1936 after the destruction of the Tulsa Star, A.J. Smitherman. In fact, her great-grandfather managed the Tulsa Star, the Black newspaper, the major Black newspaper that was destroyed in the race war of 1921. That great-granddaughter, that granddaughter, that daughter of a subsequent publisher, her name, what's her name? Oh yes, Regina Goodwin, Senator Goodwin, who I'd read about. And I told her, I said, man, I read about you in, remember that book I was talking about last week alongside Jamario's book? the book here by Victor Luckertson, Built from the Fire. He's talked about extensively in this book because he starts this book. The spine of this book is the Goodwin family, the Goodwins who ran the Oklahoma Eagle. And so this is the headquarters here. But here's a Martin Luther King Jr. parade. Here's Mr. T's barbershop from 1994. Here's that Greenwood Business District in 1994. You couldn't destroy them. Here's Greenwood Pharmacy from 1994. So what this book does is take you even past the second attempt to destroy it. There's Mount Zion, and here's the Black Wall Street Memorial that we were at. This is 1996 at the dedication. And who do we see at the dedication in addition to a lot of other people? Here is longtime Mount Zion church members of the historic Mount Zion Baptist Church.
See.
In other words, they act like the stuff is gone. We stood in front of the church right there on the corner. And so anyway, he's got a whole section called this. Yes, ma'am.
Why didn't she? Oh my God. So now I feel awful because, you know,
Why?
Well, no, she was on that stage. The question that I asked her, I wanted her to make that connection with those people who showed up in that hot ass weather because Oklahoma has the worst voter turnout, correct? 50 out of 50 turnout.
Yes.
I need to give them a reason to show up. And the reason to show up is the genealogy that you're going through. That's a very simple thread for her to connect to those people. And the very first question was like, give them the reason. What is it that you do? She should have started with that. Thank God for Lorene helping her, but I was so frustrated that you're giving us a political answer when the answer was in the genealogy. I'm sorry, I'm just sitting here.
No. I think part of it is, and she said this, didn't she? Remember, she said, you know, I know these people, they know me. He said, I'm from this community. I think, and this is always something we have to temper and balance. I saw it with the, what is it, State of the Race? I forget the two, past the mic, some to it. Tabitha Smiley used to do it too, but then, you know, Ansel Ryan and them all went out. We come into a community. I think we have to balance listening, because I'm not sure that many of those people didn't already know some of the things. Tulsa's a microcosm. Greenwood's a microcosm for every city. We talked about that. We talk about it all the time. Why aren't people activated? When people say it's not enough to say your ancestors died, I think for these people, they're no different than the rest of us. You know, and I don't know that she. What is that?
We are every week now 326 in community. Every single week, I learned something that I didn't know, or I'm reminded of something that I knew but forgot. And I think, you know, I struggle with this. So this is also a lesson for me to remind myself. You know, I may have said something 10 years ago, and I feel like if you heard it then, I don't have to repeat it. I said it already. No. It's been said. You know, and those of us in the classroom, we get a new fresh crop of students, so we get to repeat the message and the lessons for the next generation, for the next class. But this has to be reminded over and over again, because we are like that man that looked at himself in the mirror and walked away and forgot what he looked like. That's us all the time, right?
Yes.
And so, you know, so I just want to thank you, because I wish I could do it over, but I'm sitting here like, man, that conversation would have been a whole lot different had that been the center. And that probably is my fault.
Right.
So I'm just
no, it's nobody's fault. We were up against the clock. And if you notice, I ain't saying anything in part because what you all were having in terms of that conversation was the thing that needed to be talked about. It was no need to get into that history, because that would have taken it in another direction. The important thing was what you talked about, the legislation, you know, how things happen, because there are a lot of people who need that political education who will trust her to be their representative. Because what Luckerson talks about in great detail is how she busted her tail to get from Tulsa to Oklahoma City to push some legislation that she had, legislator by legislator, pushed and cajoled them into passing. And so she could have told that story, but instead, maternal health, instead, I mean, there were very practical things that would resonate with people. So I think it was incredibly effective. And with a time limit like that, pushing up against the end, And these people coming to see Fantasia. So in other words, trying to drip, drip, drip to get to that, there wasn't the context to get off into it. Because, I always sat there and said, well, you tell us about the eagle. And then the next thing see, this is the thing, obviously, I get, saddled with, because I always got to temper that on the radio. I don't even call it going down the rabbit holes. I want to put the things out there so people can make connections. But there wasn't a lot of time. I thought what you and Larry did was incredibly effective because it allowed her to talk about policymaking in the right now moment. And there was somebody who got that because it was hot as hell, and it would have been So I don't think that's it's not a question of fault. It's not a question of blame. I think it was incredibly effective, and I could have jumped in there with that. But why would I do that? Because it's not the focus. The focus was on how do we get people motivated to do those kind of things. And the other thing I'll say is those people who were sitting there came for that. As I sat there over the arc of the next 2 hours, first back at the monument and then across the street and then at the railroad tracks, I'm looking at the overwhelming majority of Black people who didn't come to nothing else. They coming to see Fantasia. That's who probably needed to be sitting there. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, I think everything happens in divine order. This Miss Mabel Little right here, by the way. This is from 1995. So this is the sister the house is named for. And again, this is an effective little book. Somebody's calling my name. This is Don Thompson, over 50 years, a photographer. He is standing in front of the memorial that we were at when we started our tour on Saturday morning. And again, this was in a white bookstore that had a curated collection. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I also got a chance to pick up the report that DeMario referred to on Friday night and that Chief talked about Saturday morning that said, because we testified, his testimony is in here as well. I strongly recommend this. This is called the Tulsa Race Massacre. The Department of Justice's review and evaluation. This is the good sister Kristen Clark. For every one of the Negroes here and others who say, Democrats and Republicans, it don't matter, it don't vote. You say what you want to about Joe Biden. You say what you want to about Kristen Clark. You said, but I guarantee you right now, that slow mouth clown who is probably going to be I don't know if he's going to be the attorney general because the White Nationalist Party is getting a little nervous about the midterms. So they may not allow Todd Blanche to become, they won't, he's already Donald Trump's lawyer. Now he's Donald Trump's lawyer at the Department of Justice. They may not allow him to be the permanent attorney general, but when the attorney general was somebody else, understand the Attorney General of the United States, and when Kristen Clark was the Attorney General for Black people, basically civil rights was on her watch. The Tulsa Race Massacre record was changed. And so this is the official report, the transcript. You'll find Chief Amasan's testimony in here as well. This is a transcript. So I was able to pick that up. And then some little books. This is Chris Rose. I thought it was interesting. This is a brief history of the Tulsa race, what they call the Tulsa Race Massacre. I thought this was interesting because it's pretty much bare bones, and it follows, as Chief does in his book, the people who, when the story is mistold, disappear from history after June the 1st, 1921. For example, as Chief tells us, what happened to Dick Rowland and Sarah Page, the white girl who they say he touched or whatever. This is chapter 7, I think it is. Whatever happened to Dick Rowland and Sarah Page, I leave it up to people to look at for themselves. So in other words, these things get frozen in 1921, and you see pictures living of ancestors who survived. There were a number of people who had survived, as DeMario talks about, who lived until right at the lip of the 21st century and beyond. It wasn't just Mother Randall. It wasn't just Mother Fletcher. It wasn't just Uncle Red. There were many people. And this is a nice little, I thought, children's book called A Promise Deferred. So I gave a couple of children's books that I didn't have, and this is one of them, The Massacre of Black Wall Street. Again, reinforcing the question of massacre. So let me begin to close this out. When we, Prof, Saturday morning, went to get Larry, and I went in the hotel lobby to get her, then to wait for her because you pulled up, said, okay, we going to the tour. Okay. I went in and I asked the guy, because I'm looking at how this hotel is built. I said, man, when was this hotel built? He says 1925. So that's interesting. Okay, tell me some more. Well, I don't know a whole lot more about it. I'm saying, okay, well, these are the guys that started. And I'm looking, as he's sitting there, there's a newspaper on the counter. I said, how much is that newspaper? I already knew the answer. He said, oh, you can have it. That's what I want. This is the Tulsa World. This is one of the newspapers that roasted black people after 21, right? This is the white newspaper. Look at the cover. Center hits 5 years of teaching history. This is the Greenwood Rising Center, the one across the street from. So we waiting on Larry. I said, okay, let me snatch this newspaper because I want this for something else. It has had 170,000 visitors, including 8,000 Tulsa public school students, and it talks about racial reconciliation and how the story needs to be told. This is the white newspaper. Now, later in the day, I'm collecting copies, including at that place where we had in class upstairs at the place called This is the Eagle. It's still public. This is one of the black newspapers. In fact, let me just show you a couple more because I picked these up during the street festival as I'm walking up and down the street and I'm collecting stuff. Here's a paper. This is a black newspaper, 26 years, the Express newspaper. I met the publisher, the Crusader. This is a black man. This is another paper in Tulsa, the Crusader. Y'all can look these up. You can subscribe to them. These are black newspapers. It's more than one black newspaper, but this is the oldest and the 10th oldest black newspaper in the country. Science and technology, print media, also science, technology, digital media, because you can read the Eagle online, and I encourage you to do that. Also, movement and memory. Look at the headline. This is the Oklahoma Eagle from May 29th to June 4th. So this is the paper from last week. Okay, look at what they put on every edition of the Oklahoma Eagle. I love this. The Tulsa Star ain't got this. They ran a story on the History Center. That's very nice. It's very nice, Tulsa Star. But look at this. Look at the headline here. This is on every issue. 5,485 weeks since the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre and a denial of justice. This is on the headline of every issue of the Oklahoma Legal when they put it out. But look at this. Prof, I know you know about this because they was talking about it when we was in the street. Look at this right here. Black Wall Street rally attracts thousands. You see that motorcycle? They was talking about this last week. Do you know what they do in May? We all know about Black Biker Weekend in South Carolina. The black bikers go to Tulsa. Them Negroes was jam-packed in that same place I'm talking about some of them same Negroes probably came to see Fantasia. They was all down there in that same 3 blocks last week. I'm sorry, week before last. It cracks me up. Look at it. Black Wall Street rally attracts thousands, but the economic benefit was uneven. These are the black bikers. And so they interview a bunch of people. They interview the brother who owns the t-shirt shop where his son was there Sunday afternoon when I went in there to get some stuff. Because, hey, man, why was y'all closed yesterday? Y'all be closed on Saturday. He said, I know, man. You know, but y'all open today. And I thank God I stayed because now I can come talk to you. I was trying to get in here yesterday. I got some stuff next door, but I couldn't get in here to y'all. He said, yeah, my pop started this. So he says this. He said, we couldn't get in. Isaiah Harris, co-owner of Black Wall Street Tees and Souvenirs. He says on a normal day, his store sees between 18 and 30 people, but during the rally, he saw hundreds. Second to Juneteenth, the rally weekend is their most profitable. So guess what? The big black biker thing comes to Tulsa. They packed in. The anniversary of the race war, not nearly as many people come. And the biggest day is coming in a couple of weeks. Juneteenth, they're going to be packed out again. How do we rethink, Prof, if we go back out there next year? Maybe it ain't the 21, maybe it's Juneteenth we come. That apparently is the biggest day. I'm just thinking, and Demario and them, yeah. In other words, it's important for us to think about our ritual moments to reinforce our movement and memory in ways that center our self-determination. And maybe it's not May 31st and June 1st. Maybe it's Juneteenth. I mean, it's very interesting to think about this. And, but watch this. Remember we were there talking about Route 66 last week because they was all in town, all these white folks for Route 66. Look what the Eagle has a story on last week. It says, amid Route 66 anniversaries, historians say black travelers found safety in Greenwood. They do a whole story on the Green Book. So there's a Green Book angle in terms of governance to Route 66. And I wouldn't have known about it had I not tracked down copies of the black newspaper because it ain't in the Tulsa Star, the Tulsa Star, the Tulsa World. And I'm going to close in a second. It ain't in the Tulsa World who did a front page article on that, his History Center, which is excellent. But again, just outside the Valence. And by the way, some of those businesses that reopened, okay, let me set the scene again. You got Greenwood and Archer. Greenwood is the street that divides. Archer's going down into Little Africa. On this side of Greenwood, where technically they say it's the black side, where the baseball stadium is and it displaced people, Senator Davis made sure, Ross rather, I think about Don Davis, certainly not Don Davis. Shout out to Don Davis, who took almost $1 million from AIPAC and was one of them Negroes in the United States Congress. I ain't mad at you, brother. Do what you do. Don Ross, State Legislator Don Ross, who was the principal fundraiser for the memorial we saw and the Greenwood Cultural Center, which is in the heart of the Black community. Don Ross also was one of the principal proponents of putting those little plaques in the sidewalks all up and down. So this was a shoe shop. This was a lawyer's office. This was a furniture store, destroyed 1921, not rebuilt, destroyed, not rebuilt. But then you see in some of the plaques, many of the plaques, barbershop, destroyed, rebuilt, furniture store, destroyed, rebuilt. Then you cross the street and they say, this is supposed to be the white side. There's a U-Haul. You remember there's a U-Haul there. I'm reading the plaques and I look up at the U-Haul, I read the plaques, and the U-Haul building was apparently repurposed as a place where, among other things, these country music stars stayed. And on the plaque, they got one of the guys in a cowboy hat, and maybe there's a paragraph, maybe 2 sentences from the end of the paragraph, they say, oh yeah, and this is also a place there are famous Tulsa musicians like Charlie Wilson. Well, damn, we've been in Tulsa for 2 days and I ain't heard Charlie Wilson's name on none of these. Of course, but in the governance formation was fascinating. But here's the thing that caught my eye. At the end, it said this building was acquired, I want to say, was it 1906? From the Creek Nation. Remember, Neil Gorsuch wrote the opinion a couple of years ago about this when he says basically a third of Oklahoma is Indian territory and it belongs to them. The Creeks were buying and selling property in Greenwood. Remember, the Black Creeks still didn't have official recognized status as members of the nation. That's what DeMario and them won the case with the Oklahoma Nation. They're not recognizing it, so now they got to go to the federal government. And I hate he does too. You got to call the feds on the indigenous people to make them recognize the Africans. Understand though, the point is this. I'm reading and looking at this politics and I'm realizing here and perhaps is another act of, I won't say betrayal, but I will say betrayal of the Creeks to the Africans who were in there as well. And I'm thinking, and this U-Haul telling the story on the side of the plaques. And finally I'm thinking, how many people don't read these plaques? Because this is on the same side of the street when you cross a little bit down where that Tulsa Rising History Center is. It becomes very complicated in how we narrate movement and memory. Very complicated. One final story on the newspapers that will begin to kind of help us shore all this up. Remember, this Tulsa World coming out racist against the Africans after 21. Before that, there was a newspaper called this newspaper was called the Tulsa, what's it called? The Tulsa Eagle? Not the Tulsa Eagle. Hold on for a second, because I'm going to show you the publisher of the Tulsa newspaper, Tulsa Star, the Tulsa Star. The Tulsa Star was published by a dude named A.J. Smitherman. A.J. Smitherman, journalist, editor, he was one of the co-founders in 1906 of Greenwood. This is his biography. This is great-granddaughter. They just published this. This is Raven Mahia Williams. The name of the book, A.J. Smitherman, Black Gold, Black Wall Street, and Black Power. A.J. Smitherman got run out of Tulsa. They destroyed the Tulsa Star. He had several newspapers. And it's very interesting, this book. Like I said, it just came out 2025. I had to send off for this from the A.J. Smitherman Foundation. They have started a Smitherman Foundation. Y'all can get this book. And in reading it, as I'm still not finished yet, because this is his literal memoir. What Raven Mahia Williams, who I think is his great-granddaughter, did is publish his memoir. He wrote this memoir. He died in 1935. He was run out of Tulsa. But the following year after his death, they started the Oklahoma Eagle, and that is Senator Goodwin's family. These Negroes, Don't freeze your history with defeat. We continue. The other book that, remember, Prof, as you all brought her to the stage to introduce her cousin, Dr. Leslie Stratford. This is the book that Leslie Stratford, that her first cousin, who received an award, who runs the largest equity formation for owned by Black people in the country, John Rogers. This is their great-grandfather's book, The Memoirs of J.B. Stratford, John Baptiste Stratford. He is the brother who had the hotel. This just got published. Remember, this is she and her sister. Her sister just made transition, as we heard on Friday night there. Here we got, that's her sister right there, who made transition, Laurel Stratford. And here's Dr. Leslie Stratford, an academic scholar. Here she is. And this, as I was talking to her Friday night, I said, sis, y'all got your great-grandfather's stuff up. Yeah, and remember, they ran him out, and then they charged him incredibly with violence. After they burned his thing to the ground, he was never able to go back. He was in Missouri. Then they tried to get him out. So then her grandfather comes in as a lawyer, gets him extradited to Chicago, gets him out of jail. Not gets him out of jail, gets him out of the state of Missouri before they can send him back to Tulsa to probably be killed. He ends up in Chicago, and that's how all them Negroes end up in Chicago. That's John Rogers Jr., whose wife Desiree Rogers, of course, worked at the White House. This is the Obama people. And he said he grew up on Greenwood in the South, Greenwood Street on the south side of Chicago. This is their ancestor. All of these testimonies are there. And so as we kind of bring this to a close today, I want to say one final thing. Leave Standpipe Hill and the soil collection. And for the first time since the previous day, for a couple of hours, when I'm by myself sitting at that monument and memorial and sitting across from Mabel Little House thinking, okay, I'm gonna just take enough of this in, so as I'm continuing to remind myself of what we've talked about before, and as I'm continuing to study and find out, I can make these linkages and sit here quietly and be in this place. For the first time since then, Sunday morning, I'm by myself. Okay, this is where a different kind of work takes place. I'm not moving out of this neighborhood until I walk every inch I can. And as I'm walking through the neighborhood, the main place I wanted to go is the place we have talked about, but I didn't get a chance to go over there. We didn't get a chance to go over there. Go to session 206. It's 120 sessions ago. Go to the session where we talked about the John Hope Franklin Memorial. We talked about that because they had dedicated it, John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Space, and I found it. It was a block and a half away from Standpipe Hill in the other direction. I'm like, okay, but I'm by myself, and I'm not just gonna run through here. I came in from the side where they got these 3 statues that just make me mad. And I'm saying, okay, because they got 3 statues there at this John Hope Franklin place, Memorial Center. You come in, and somebody honked the horn at me. I look, and it was the security guard. They hired a security guard to kind of be around there. He was sitting in the security guard car with, of all things, a turtle. What you doing with a turtle? He said, there are turtles all over Oklahoma. They be on the road, whatever. I found this one on the way to work in the middle of the street, so I stopped and picked him up. What you gonna do with that turtle, man? I'm gonna feed him. I don't know. Maybe I'll put him in somewhere in the wild. I don't know. So then, all right, so, okay, well, I'm going over here to these statues. All right, bro. Now go in. The first thing you see is a black man with his hand up. And underneath him, a bronze statue, a black man with his hand up, and underneath it, the word humiliation. Okay. Then you go around, and it's a white man with rifles in both hands. And it says hostility. Okay. Then you go around, and there's a third statue. It's like a pillar. Humiliation, hostility. And then the third one is a white doctor holding a black baby. I had to go read up on it. Hope. Really? This what we doing? Especially when Dr. A.C. Jackson The surgeon, remember what Chief told us as we doing the tour. It's all in books. We've talked about it before, but to hear him talk about it, a descendant, cousin of Demario Solomon Simmons, to say, when they killed that black surgeon, and the white boy said to the other white boy, "You fool, now there's nobody to take care of any of us." Dr. A.Z. Jackson. I'm thinking, why you put a white doctor with the black baby? You didn't earn delivering that black baby. Anyway, it's all cool. At that point, I'm thinking all the things I've always thought about this social structure facing, kind of pleading for humanity, but I calm my ass all the way down because that is coming in from that side where the parking lot is. But as I look beyond, I saw the main center of the monument, a beautiful bronze tower. At the bottom of the tower, Africans, indigenous people, pre-invasion. Then you see the hostilities, Trail of Tears, capture as it's spiraling up. Then you see the building of Oklahoma. You see Langston University. You see all of it. You see Greenwood. You see the businesses. Then you spiral up a little bit more. You see the race war. Then you spiral up. You see the rebuilding. And then you see people reach into the sky, say this is beautiful. And who do you think Prof sculptured? Who did the sculpture of all of them? It was Ed Dwight. I knew that. We've talked about it. But this man, Ed Dwight, cultural meaning making and movement and memory isn't just books. It's also art. And this piece, which is in the center of a circle that's a cosmogram, I just stopped. I took my cap off and I just had to. And then it's surrounded by quotes. Buffalo Soldiers, the founders of Langston University, indigenous people. It's surrounded by quotes on bronze plaques. And I'm looking and say, Ed Dwight, you've done it again. This is the man who carved the pieces on the state ground of South Carolina, the Harriet Tubman statue in New York. This is Ed Dwight. Ed Dwight, who's done Martin Luther King all over the country. This is Ed Dwight. Ed Dwight. I mean, y'all look up Ed Dwight. You can look on his website. You can see the things. In fact, he has a special issue, a special book that he publishes out of his website. I have a copy here where you can kind of go through the things. And on his website, you can see all the things he's done. And it will astonish you. Remember, Ed Dwight, the first black astronaut. Not the first black astronaut. That was, anyway, it'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, he was married to Lauren Cress Love. Yeah, Love was his last name. But the point is this. Ed Dwight, Larry interviewed him for the History Makers. He's still doing work. He's got his studio in Colorado. I said, this is what I wanted to see, but words fail. And then I went out the other way, and that's an entrance. You can come in on the humiliation, hope, and hostility side, or you can come in and see that cosmogram-centered tower, which is there. It's a different experience. And then after I walked out, I walked across the street. This is the Tulsa Arts District. The real estate violence is so apparent. The coffee shops and all this kind of things. What the hell? Then I walked down across that block, and I'm back where we were, Prof. Right there in hailing distance. You see cheek to jowl the fight. And I'm thinking, wow, this is how movement and memory operates. Ed Dwight engaged in clearly walking a razor's edge. He gives the people who want to look at this as a trauma-based thing what they need. But if you know what you're looking at, the governance, the ways of knowing, the movement and memory, he has done what he has done consistently all over this country. He has placed it right there where we need it to be. So I just want to say that, what we did last week, again, thank you, Prof, for getting us there, being at the center of those conversations. Oh, and then I went to the airport, and then I saw Tiffany and David Johns and, all the people there. I'm looking like, man, Andre Perry and Kathy and them. I'm like, what y'all doing? And I realized that Greenwood Rising, that whole formation, attempting to get these resources for us and think about Tulsa writ large and think about Black Wall Street at the center of it, that is work that is moving to uplift us, that's moving to advance us. And that piece that DeMario and Tiffany are doing, which is in contact with that other work, which is connected with it and working with it, but that is anchored in the governance formations of African people, the people who poured them libations and collected that soil, the people who took us on the tour, that is the center of the self-determining space. And the fact that out of that small group of African people, all of whom know each other, didn't know that that was what was going on in that very close center. That's where I agree with you 100%. We've got to do a better job of making ourselves aware. Because as we make ourselves aware, we can enhance any space we fight in. So I'll start with that roots and branches, because that stuff they doing is a branch. The roots is where we were. You know what I'm saying?
And I don't know if we should all wait until Juneteenth. It should be the whole month. Like there should be, but we should do a better job. But this is the work that I think I do best, which is connecting those dots. So I'm looking forward. I'm writing down the anniversary of the Black Press 200th anniversary. We got a plan now for magnifying that. I feel like, you know, our media has failed us, and we need to resurrect a lot of those Black papers, or at least let people know they're there. And maybe that's the work the Hub is going to be doing, the Hub.News. I've already kind of imagined, you know, what those projects should be next year. We're meeting about that, and I'm pouring a lot of the energies trying to get back to my roots, which is journalism, and reimagining what that should look like in the future for all of us. So I'm looking forward to what's next. Also, to make some announcements, if you are a member of Nubia, which you can do through a Knarrative subscription, Knarrative with the K is silent. This week, if you go to the top of the Nubia app, you'll see This Week in Nubia. You click on that and you'll see all of the classes, including this one, what is coming up this week as well. Maroon's Medicine Chess is tomorrow with Dr. Senyata at 9:30. And tomorrow night at 8 p.m., we're reviving Nubia and Refill. That's Urias is going to be hosting that. And it's where we get together and watch film and discuss it. And we did it at a Healthy, Wealthy, Wise with, and that was incredible. The Book of Eli, to sit with a community of people and watch something and then have the discussion in real time. So that is going to be happening tomorrow night at 8 p.m. So it's a classic film. No spoilers, they say. So
no spoilers. He said it's a surprise.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the way forward. We're in community. If there's something that is needed, you know, pick up your brick and bring it, and we'll support it.
Absolutely.
But cannot be sitting on the sidelines like the Muppets or whatever in the balcony complaining about everything and not actively participating in what should come next, because we have the ability to do that. And Tulsa is a great example, created out of the imagination of a lot of people coming from different places to a place to find their space in that place. And if we're going to resurrect it everywhere, this is what it looks like. So I just want to say thank you.
That's exactly right. No, thank you, Prof. And in these roots, reminding ourselves of our roots. We are the branches. If we remember that, then we know that we are sustained by something that's much larger that can't be destroyed.
That's right.
There's a new exhibit at the DC Public Library. I was down there Thursday evening. With the lady who assembled it, and also my man Mo, who does the audiovisual stuff for DCPL at the Martin Luther King Library. And it's on DC history. They're doing the 250th, but they're doing it from DC. It's almost all Black. So it's Roberta Flack, it's Dick Gregory, it's Gil Scott Heron, it's just all this beautiful stuff. And this is a white woman, and she's walking us through, and I'm asking her questions. We're talking back and forth. And one of the things that's very powerful in it was thinking about the roots of our culture. Because of course, go-go is there and all that. But in talking about it, we were talking, I said, what's this right here? I don't know this picture. He said, oh, at one time, there was a band shell in the water on the back of the Lincoln Memorial. She said, when you go around the Lincoln Memorial, you see those steps. Yes, I always wonder what people do. She said, oh no, there was a band shell in the water, and people would sit on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and listen to these concerts. I said, oh, really?
Wow.
She said, yeah. And then there was a big storm that came and destroyed them, and they never rebuilt it. Now, we all saw this week, Bozo talking about he going to build a promenade, and they want to name it for me. But first of all, he ain't going to build no promenade. Second of all, I'm thinking, because you don't know the roots, you don't know that there was a time that if you want to rebuild that band shell out there in the water, and we can have concerts, but his roots are rotten. See, Bozo don't have no roots. He's building stuff on that. Our roots are so deep that you don't even understand what you're seeing from us. These are branches, bruh. These
Yeah.
are branches. You can't destroy us. You cut off the root. You cut off the branches of Black Wall Street. The root's so deep, they built it again. You ran a highway through there. The root's so deep, it's coming back. So I love the metaphor of the hub, because hub speaks so prominently to the fact that what you see is what you see, but what you can see is the thing that sustains what you see. But anyway, I just thought, oh, one other thing, let me mention this right quick, because I just had this paper. I picked up another copy of the Eagle. This is from the week before. I wanted to know, why y'all having a kickball tournament, Prof, in the baseball stadium? And leave it to the Black newspaper how kickball became a community craze.
Come
The
on.
Dreamland kickball community. I'm like, Black people go have joy. Come on back, Prof. I just wanted to mention that, because I'm like,
Okay,
why
wait, hold on.
having a kickball tournament?
We would shut down the street in front of my house. As a matter of fact,
Can't
there's
hear
a
you, Prof.
manhole. Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello, 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 hello. All right. You hold on. Why are you muted? Can you
No.
can't hear me?
It might be, you know what? It may be, maybe these went
Okay.
out.
All right.
Try
I
it.
can hear me.
No.
You can't hear me?
Make sure.
Oh man, because I want to ask you a question. All right. Did I stop sharing it? Let me go back to the comments. Are we still live? We're still here.
No.
All right.
I don't know if the people can hear. Let me look. Let me do the Nubia app.
Yeah, they can hear.
Because I can't hear.
Hello. I see everybody can hear.
No.
All right, let's not do that. All right, we'll just end. We'll wrap. I'll ask you next week.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear both of you. Yeah, of course.
We'll wrap
Maybe I'll type it. I'm gonna type it in the private chat. Okay. Can you see this? Look in the chat. Hold on. Look in the chat. All right. Can you see? Look at the chat. Look in the chat. In the chat.
They can hear both of us. I can't hear you.
Okay.
You can hear me, but they can hear both of us. I see now. Okay.
All right.
Very good.
All right.
Are they talking about kickball in the Nubia chat?
That's what I wanted to talk about. I grew up playing
Love
football.
You. Hey, y'all. Chapter 17 through 20 on Monday night in Howard French, the Second Emancipation. So love you. See you all tomorrow. Maroon's Medicine Chest if you're in Nubia. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.